everyone. We'll go ahead and get started since it's 12:01. Today, I am really excited to be kicking off Women's History Month and an Ohio Primary Month, talking about the history of voting rights and our continued fight for voter access for women, BIPOC communities, and others. And I'm so excited about our speakers today. We have representatives coming to us from the League of Women Voters, and also from Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc., and the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, which she could explain to you when we get there. My name is Dr. Christina Collins. You can just call me Christina. I am happy to be the Executive Director for Honesty for Ohio Education. And again, just welcoming you all today to the room as you're coming in. Please feel free to put into the chat your names, pronouns, and organizations if you'd like to. So who is Honesty? Very quickly, Honesty is a nonpartisan statewide coalition of over 70 partners. We champion honest education that is diverse and inclusive for all students K through 12 and in higher education. And we do our work in 3 areas: the State House, the State Board of Education, the Department of Education, and in local schools. So we are from the local schools all the way up to the State House. For today, we have, again, a great conversation coming. I'll be introducing Jen Miller in just a minute and Deidra Reese in a second. Just at the beginning of this, quick reminder, if you haven't already, be sure to join our mailing list. We're going to talk about a few of the State House bills that are going on right now, and you can get up-to-date information on that by joining our mailing list. So talking about the state of education, currently, as you may know, the State House is on recess. We've got this primary pending, so they are taking a little break for a bit. But before they went into recess, a couple of important things happened. First of all, House Bill 27 was passed by the Senate, and it included some brand new appropriations. So it will go back to the House at some point, though the rumors are that the House is not going to concur with the bill as amended by the Senate. A second item that was passed last week is Senate Bill 17, which forces narrow concepts of capitalism into high school financial literacy standards. One of the really important things about this bill is that it forces the opening of standards before they are up to be opened for revision. So it's very interesting for the State House to open the standards in this way. This was passed by the Senate and it's pending the governor's signature at this time. We have a list here of bills to be keeping on your radar for when the State House returns from recess and is in session. This year particularly is interesting because we have something called lame duck at the end of the year. It's the last few months of the General Assembly. So our General Assembly will be rolling over after elections in November. And what happens during lame duck is just a flurry of bills pass very quickly. And everything moves very fast from about November to December. So these bills are bills to keep on your radar for that lame duck session, if nothing happens to them before then, as they may move pretty quickly in November and December before new legislators come in on January 1st. Finally, so the State Board of Education and the Department of Education and Workforce, these are upcoming meetings. So the State Board will be meeting on March 11th. The next meeting for the Department of Education and Workforce is March 14th. Just a couple of notes on what's going on with the State Board here that we want to bring awareness to, and that is that the State Board has been assigned a budget line that is running at a deficit. So when House Bill 33 passed last year and the State Board was completely reconfigured and their responsibilities were reconfigured, they were also given a budget line item that was already in deficit. So the State Board has been trying to figure out how to function at this point with that deficit. They just passed a resolution that requested the legislature that the legislature fund them that deficit amount. So the board has made that request. And also the state board may be moving to the William Green Building, which is another location in downtown Columbus, but it removes them from the Department of Education and Workforce, which is where the state board has met for years. So a lot of interesting things happening to the state board. And again, the next Department of Education and Workforce meeting is on March 14th. So our conversation today, again, very excited to be talking about women's suffrage, the pursuit for voting rights in March, Women's History Month. So we will be talking again to Jen Miller and Deidra Reese. A little more information on Jen. Jen is the executive director of the League of Women Voters of Ohio. She has over 20 years experience working with diverse communities to promote social justice and civic action through positions with Columbus Recreation and Parks, the Martin Luther King Jr. Arts Complex, Sierra Club, The Ohio State University, and Global Gallery. She earned her master's in arts in policy, education, and administration, a program of the John Glenn School of Public Affairs at Ohio State. Jen also holds 2 bachelor's degrees in vocal music and history and ethnic studies from Capital University. And she is a jazz singer, which is really cool. So excited to hear from Jen.
Thank you so much. Hello, Honesty family. I'm so glad to be with you. I'm big fans of you all. I don't get to join you often, so thanks for having me today. And welcome to the team, Dr. Collins. We're so thrilled you're here. So many of you are League members or know about League. We have a long history. Like the Deltas, we have a suffrage legacy. So you'll get to hear from Deidra, and I'm really glad she's here. So we were formerly the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association here in Ohio. We became the League in 1920. There were about 14 organizations who voted to form us. That included really teachers, nurses, business leaders, women lawyers who then became the first judges, the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, the DAR, Council on Jewish Women, just a very diverse group of people. And it was all about making sure that this new group of individuals that would be voting had all the information they needed to be successful voters. And since then, we've done a lot on defending the right to vote. Next slide. Parts of this slide didn't load. We'll try anyway. And if need be, that's okay. Okay, yeah, we can just keep going. I wonder why it's taking so long. Sorry about that. It might be that we just have too many pictures. If you want to advance to the next one, I'll talk now. I'll just keep talking. Ohio's history of suffrage, you can go to the next slide, Cynthia. Ohio's history of suffrage is particularly significant because in 1920, both presidential candidates were from Ohio. And so while Ohio was kind of in the first tranche of states to ratify, Ohio advocates spent a lot of time pushing those 2 presidential candidates. The path to ratification for the 19th Amendment is a super bumpy one. Right. And just to be clear, it kept being rejected in the South because they were afraid of enfranchising Black women. It finally does. We finally get our last state to ratify in Tennessee. And they called it like the pipeline of advocates between Ohio and Tennessee because so many of our advocates were heading down there. Next slide. So the wording matters here, shall not be denied on account of sex. That doesn't mean exactly that we were given the right to vote. Next slide. And of course, we weren't given the right to vote, right? People were lost custody of their children. They were jailed. So many things happened. So we were not just given that right. Next slide. The other thing is it's not all women. Right. So 1924 is when Native Americans finally get citizenship, although it's not guaranteed until the 60s. Puerto Rican women, not until 1929, but that's actually only those who could read and write. And you continue to see 61 is Washington, D.C. residents. Then we have the poll taxes in 64, all of those challenges that lead to the Voting Rights Act in 65. 18-year-olds. So we were sending folks to war who couldn't vote for their commander in chief. Disability voters, like all these different groups, right? Bottom line is that we had to continue to work for access, right? And there's still more work being done. There's talk about lowering the voting age even more, right? We see today here in Ohio and beyond lots of barriers to the ballot box. And so one of the things we know about how this is taught in school is that if women's suffrage is covered at all, it's probably a little tiny pink box on the side with like Susan B. Anthony and nothing else. And it's all wrapped up into this bow, but that's not really how the story went. Next slide, please. But I want to go back a little bit. Like one of the first myths we have is that women's suffrage started at Seneca Falls. Absolutely not. That is a whitewashing of this history. It actually started at the anti-slavery conventions. Those were universal justice conventions. They were looking at the rights of women and people of color together. Seneca Falls is kind of funny because it was actually in 1898 Susan B. Anthony was like just wanting to have a media hook, which I understand wanting to have a media hook. And she was like, it was 50 years from Seneca Falls. And so she did a whole thing on that. And that's where history got rewritten, that's when women's suffrage started. Wanted to throw out there that just real quickly, the 13th through the 15th Amendment, those amendments were this really interesting moment in time, right? Because you had this universal movement for justice. The powers that be do what they always do, right? They say justice is a pie and only some of you can get a slice right now. And they said, we're going to end slavery and enfranchise Black men, at least on paper. And that split this movement right down the middle. So you had really along racial lines, you see this universal justice movement split. And that remains a challenge that we still have today. Next slide. And so just to keep going on that split, just like some of this intersectionality, just want to think about here, is that we see that this universal movement for justice had some racial fractures already. If you look at the Women's Temperance Union, which at the time in 1874 was in Ohio, and they said that there should be separate units. Delta, I will let my dear friend Delta talk about that work. But again, we have like the organizers of the march in 1913 telling the African-American women that they need to be to the back of the parade. Though Ida B. Wells said she was gonna, was it Ida B? I think it was Ida B. She was like, she decided to march in the middle of the parade with her Chicago people, and they all said, yeah, cool. Same with leagues. Some leagues were integrated, some were not. But even if they were integrated, they didn't necessarily have Black women as leaders. In the Dayton area, we did actually have Black women in the leaders, and in Toledo we did, but in a lot of other places we didn't. Next slide. And so this is like this fascinating little moment where you have someone like Susan B. Anthony, who was first fighting against slavery, but then splits, right? And she says, I'm not gonna like support voting rights for Black men and not women. I'm not gonna do that. You have Lucy Stone out of Oberlin at the time saying, like, I'd be thankful if anyone can get some rights. And then you have Mary Church Terrell. And I think this is really important, where it's this idea that you have these women who are both a gender minority and a racial minority, and they're being asked to only consider one of those, or not being fully seen. Next slide. I think that matters, and I'm not going to go much more into this, but when 2020 hit, what we did was we got a grant from the Ohio Humanities, because I wanted to make sure that we were looking at the history of voting rights and suffrage in an intersectional way. So we hired two women scholars, one Black, one white, one older, one younger, one from Northern Ohio, one from Southern Ohio, and all to kind of create some materials. So we have some materials there, some books actually that start from baby board books, a book list, all the way up to like heavy duty history. Here's some other good sources just for the history of voting rights. Next slide. I wanted to just make sure y'all know that we do have this curriculum. We started this curriculum in 1964. For the first time ever, it's in English and Spanish and is free. We used to sell these online, and they do have teacher materials in there. And part of the reason why we wanted to do them in Spanish was so that any new Americans that wanted to understand how our government works could do that. But kind of, it was about the fact that we know that government and civics is not taught that much, and we thought there might be some entrepreneurial Spanish teachers that wanted to just kind of incorporate into their classroom. They could use this textbook because it's very easy to read. Next slide. I just want to remind everyone, and I know that Deidra is going to talk about access to the ballot, but it is absolutely true that access to the ballot is designed for middle income white folks who can take work off easily and can drive themselves to vote, right? That's who it's for. Like that's that. And if you have other challenges, if you have other, financially, or you're a person with a disability, or you're a student whose address continues to change, or whatever it is, it becomes more challenging for you. The election protection hotlines are so critical for us. We are considered here in Ohio to have one of the strongest election protection coalitions in the country, and I'm very, very proud of that. You see the many hotline numbers there. You can also Google or text that 866 our vote and get assistance in real time. One of the things I want to tell you is that I know that this works because when we get these calls in and we truly have a moment of voter suppression, someone being turned away who should rightfully be able to vote, or given a provisional ballot when they shouldn't have that. I have often been the person, and it has been my honor to do so, to call the Board of Elections or the Secretary of State on behalf of those voters. And I know of many stories I could tell you right now of people who called this hotline whose rights were then upheld and taken care of. The other thing I'm going to tell you about election protection is, as we expanded early voting, as we fight for a lot of different, whether it's through the courts or whether it's in the state house, the data, the information that the advocates get through these hotlines helps us understand where voters need more assistance and where our priorities should be in terms of directing public policy advocacy, suing, actually improving our education if we're just realizing people are getting very confused about certain language or terminology. So this is very important. So make sure, if you do nothing else, please make sure that you share the election protection hotlines if you see those on Honesty's page, or you see those on League's or Delta's or OOC's page. Please do that, because even if you solved the problem yourself, it's important, because it could be that you have the tools for solving that, but maybe 5 other people ran into the same thing and they didn't. And I'll give you an example of one of our staff people who was very nastily talked to. She had dropped her ID when she was jumping on the bus. She's New American. And the poll worker said to her, well, I don't know about you, but where we're from, I don't know about where you're from, but here you have to have ID. And it was very nasty. And of course she could hold her own because she's a League of Women Voters staff person. I still had her call the hotline so that we had record of that. And so that we could then follow up with the Board of Elections about that location and that kind of undignified and unnecessary treatment of someone here in Ohio who rightfully can vote. Next slide. Just a reminder that we do have a voter guide, and we hope you'll use it. You can get a lot of other stuff on there. Next slide. Oh, and I thought I had vote riders in there and I forgot to add it. So I know that Deidra is going to talk about a whole bunch of things, and then she and I can have a fun conversation with you. But we do have a challenge here when it comes to voting, that now early voting and on election day in your neighborhood polling location, there's only limited IDs you can have. vote writers. We'll get that in the chat. And actually, I bet you Michael Barron can do it for us, or Sam did. Good job. They can help individuals get their IDs. And keep in mind that it's not just getting the ID, it's all the backing documents. And so if someone you know doesn't have their birth certificate, or they don't have what they need to go to the BMV and get a free state ID or to get a new driver's license, they can call Vote Writers, and they will be assigned a volunteer who will help them through the entire process and even cover costs that are necessary. But again, those IDs that are accepted now, and hopefully y'all have voted already, but state issued driver's license or Ohio issued state ID, passport, so book or card, US or Ohio veteran ID or military ID, no longer do county veteran IDs count. This is causing a lot of harm to a lot of folks. And with that, I just want to say we are always here to help you and support you. And it's my honor to turn it back. I know Deidra's got a good presentation for us.
Thank you so much, Jen. Really appreciate all that information. And I'm starting to write down some questions for the end here, which is a good reminder. Just a few housekeeping notes I missed at the beginning. Just so you know, the videos and slides are going to be updated or uploaded to Honesty's Lunch and Learn page. When you go through the slides, anything in yellow is going to be a hyperlink. These are also the links that you're seeing put into the chat right now. You can also feel free to go ahead and start dropping any questions you have for our panelists in the chat, and we will get back to those right after we hear from Deidra. Deidra Reese has a long history of advocacy and service and a passion for community empowerment. She has a strong interest in civil rights, fairness, and justice. Deidra has more than 30 years in the public policy, community engagement, and advocacy arena, and she has successfully woven her professional and personal passions to give voice to marginalized people. She holds a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology and a master's degree in public policy. And Deidra, I noticed, I think we have your last name spelled incorrectly, so we will get that corrected. But we're very, very happy to have you here today and looking forward to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's perfectly fine. As I said before, I'll answer to anything nice. So I'm really happy to be here today and to also be on the panel with Jen. Jen and I have worked together for many years. Unfortunately, we've had to struggle and fight to protect voters' rights, but it's the right cause. So we're happy to lock arms and do that together. And I really appreciate being able to be a part of the Lunch and Learn program and to share some information about Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Delta Sigma Theta, and Jen shared this with you, we were founded in 1913, and we were the second African-American sorority founded at all, but we were founded at Howard University by 22 college students. And the whole idea was so that we could do public service and community service. And despite the fact that we were brand new, these young Black women on this campus at a time that women really weren't even allowed to be in significant leadership roles, the very first public act that we took was to participate in the suffrage march. Next slide, please. Hopefully we'll go to it. So if you see there on the side, there is a picture there showing the actual march that happened in March of 1913. We know that women marched down Pennsylvania Avenue fighting for the right to be able to participate in voting. It was a hostile environment. People very much romanticize and glamorize what happened, but it was a very hostile situation, and there were women who were actually harmed. And again, we were told, you can participate, but you need to go to the back. And most of our members actually did walk in the back, but Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell decided that they were not going to be in the back of the crowd, that they were going to put themselves in the middle of the crowd and march with their state delegations anyway, because they thought it was important to have representation there. And that's the attitude that continues to pervade with our organization. Mary Church Terrell became our very first honorary member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and because of what she did in the suffrage movement. And fun fact for everyone, our last honorary member that we brought in is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. So you see the type of women that we like to bring into our fold because of the significant contributions that they make in their field of endeavor. And we do have an oath that we try to live up to, and a piece of that is that we'll take an active interest in the welfare of our country, using our influence toward the enactment of laws for the protection of the unfortunate and weak, and for the repeal of those depriving human beings of their privileges and rights. And when I became a member back in 1985, that was the one piece that really stuck with me, and part of what drives me in the work that I do and makes me want to make certain that I'm making a way for other people to be empowered and to engage in the process, particularly through the exercise of their voting. Next slide, please. So anytime there has been a movement in this country, Delta women have shown up in the movement, and I just wanted to share some information about some of those, and particularly when we talk about voting. You probably recognize some of these faces. Dorothy Height, she was a national president of Delta Sigma Theta. Marcia Fudge, also a national president of Delta Sigma Theta. We have Stephanie Tubbs Jones, who was a congresswoman, the first Black congresswoman from Ohio. She's there. Barbara Jordan, she was a United States Senator from Texas, and she was the first Black woman to address a national political convention. Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run as a major party candidate for president of the United States. Ryan McClin, the first Black woman to serve in the Ohio State Senate. And I have a personal connection to her because I was her legislative aide. And Joyce Beatty, who was the current congresswoman from the 3rd District here in Ohio, and obviously our Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Each of these women have had some hand in helping to advance the cause of voting rights in particular. When we talk about Dorothy Height, some people don't know this. People give a lot of credit to Martin Luther King and some of the men who are a part of the movement for the March on Washington, which we know was about civil rights and voting rights. But she was one of the first architects of saying, we should have this march and this thing should actually happen. And not to toot our horn as women, but we know women know how to organize. So she was very key in bringing that particular event together and making certain that there was an agenda that went beyond gathering, but actually helped to shape the Civil Rights Act that ended up being passed in 1964. So very critical into all of that work. And certainly women of Delta have had their hand in a whole lot of that work that has happened in multiple states here in Ohio, as well as on the federal level. Next slide, please. So some of the activities that we engage in happens through our National Social Action Commission. And I happen to be a member of that commission. I was just appointed to that last year. And one of the great things that I've ever been able to do in the sorority. But we engage in our legislative, executive, and judicial process by making certain that we stay abreast of what is actually being considered, and we lobby and engage and inform our members as well as the public about these issues so that people can be activated and energized to be able to raise their voice and impact those policies so that they are empowered. So we make certain that voters can be enlightened in their citizenship. And we research issues much like the League of Women Voters does. So at the local level, we provide different town hall meetings. We provide white papers on issues. And more importantly, we make certain that we engage people by registering voters. Sometimes we co-host events with the leagues. We're very excited because we have a national memorandum of understanding with the league. And I believe that this is the 6th one that we have signed. So we are continuing to move forward with that relationship. And in addition to doing voter registration, that MOU also includes the election protection program. So that is something that we're very proud of, and making certain that in particular, we are looking at precincts that have a heavy number of minority communities and people of color to make certain that we are monitoring those precincts so that the games that sometimes people play, such as not opening them up on time, not having a sufficient number of voting machines or ballots, that is not happening in a way that disenfranchises people of color, because or people who are not as wealthy, because those are the communities that tend to be disenfranchised by either policy or by actions. And we want to make certain that that's not happening. People are having a fair access to the ballot, get their ballots counted. and have their voice there. And then we also just educate in general on various policy issues. And we also encourage Deltas to run for public office. You saw some of those people, so you know the caliber of women that are a part of our organization, but we try to encourage them not to just work from the sidelines, but also to actually get involved into those policy-making roles so that they can have a direct voice and the direct ability to impact those decisions. And we've been very successful at doing that at a number of levels. And right now, I believe there are 7 members of Delta Sigma Theta that are serving in the US Congress at this time. Next slide, please. Right now, our legislative priorities that we do review this every year to try to look at what are the key things that are happening that the community sees as most significant are economic justice, education, environmental justice, health equity, reimagining public safety, reproductive justice, and voting and civic engagement. In my life in Delta Sigma Theta, since I've been in since 1985, and I will tell anyone that I was 6 when I became a member. Of course, that's a joke, but I like to tell myself I was very young because I can't believe it's been that many years now. Voting and civic engagement has always been a part of this list because no matter what the other priorities are, if we don't have voting and civic engagement, you do not have the ability to impact those other priorities. So it is always married to voting and civic engagement and helping people understand why it is so important that we have that as our foundation. And every time there has been a threat to our voting rights, we have been engaged in that fight, even to the extent of being party to challenges to laws in various states in the judicial system. North Carolina, when they significantly changed their laws and restricted, we became a party in that lawsuit and were very successful there. We have been parties in lawsuits as it has related to redistricting. So we have been engaged in various aspects, making certain that being able to vote and having the vote count in the manner that it should is happening in the manner that it actually should be occurring. Next slide, please. I think I mentioned before, but we do lobby. We have lobby days, so we lobby at our state capitals, but we also lobby at the nation's capital and at the United Nations. One of the things that's unique about our organization, we are the only Black organization, period, that has NGO status, non-governmental organization status at the United Nations. And we have been going in, I believe, for the last 20 years annually and lobbying there. And we typically lobby for the rights, something having to do with women in general around the world. This year, we are focusing on women's health and women's ability to vote. So very excited to be doing that work. And we will be going in at the end of this month for that. Next weekend, next Friday, as a matter of fact, we will be going to the nation's capital for our lobby day. We've got 2,500 women that will be descending on the Capitol and lobbying on various issues. And what just this week has risen even back up to the very top of the list is we are going to be pushing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act again as a high priority, trying to get Congress to move on that because we know it has just been sort of sitting and languishing and not moving. So we've been making phone calls for the last couple of days, and our delegates will be going in and talking to their members of Congress and the Senate about that issue in particular. Next slide, please. We also, as I said, we try to encourage our members, but also others to run for office. And we have a Chisholm Jordan Institute that we offer to train Black women to run for office. So that is offered every year. And there are women from all over the world. Well, actually, we have had a couple women, international women, who have been a part of this, but mostly they're here stateside in the United States because it's run virtually. And then there are 2 times that they actually come in person for a weekend. And, you know, it's a cohort that goes through it over the course of a year. And they just prep them every aspect you could think of to be able to actually run for office. And some who have gone through it have been successful, and they run at every level. You know, local level, we've had people run for Congress, for mayor, you name it. Some of the names, if I told you, you probably go, oh, wow, that's really great. But it's a very, very good program. And then we also have some of our chapters run similar programs for young women even at the middle school level, to expose them to service, whether it is elective service or just in a bureaucratic role in our government, just understanding how all of these things fit together and work together to serve the community at large. And our Columbus chapter actually has a Shirley Chisholm Girls in Government program that we do that actually generates this exact same type of outcome. Next slide. One of the things that we did a couple of years ago was establish a 501c4 organization, which is called D4 for Women in Action, so that we could actually do express advocacy for people that run for office. So it is separate from Delta Sigma Theta, but it was founded by some of the women who are members of Delta Sigma Theta. So again, it's relatively new, but it just gives another way to be engaged in the, I guess, the political sphere on the other side. So it has become a much more known quantity, and people are seeking endorsements and advocacy on behalf of their candidacy. So, you know, it just gives us a little bit more power in another way because people understand what that means. Again, it's separate from Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, but you know, sort of related in a different way, just because it's some of the same people who are already Deltas and understand the power of that type of advocacy as well. Next slide. That's it, I guess.
Ooh, thank you. Thank you so much. Great presentations. I mean, really good information here. Now is the time for anyone viewing to be entering any questions that you have in the chat. I have a couple to get us started though. And the first one, I'm going to throw to Deidra first. So you know it's coming to you. That's someone did that in a webinar once, and I was like, that's great. You know it's coming. Okay. So Deidra, why, you know, we're about honest education here. And there have been a lot of attacks on teaching history and education across the nation in the last few years, especially. Why are these stories, why is the story of the Deltas so important to know? And how does the story relate to the story of democracy in America?
Thank you so much for that question. I think part of the problem with, you know, I'm a Christian, right? So I know everybody isn't, but that's part of my identity. And, you know, the Bible that I read says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge, right? And I think that that is true in so many ways. When we don't know it, that vacuum creates something where people can go down the wrong path, right? You don't know the contributions that certain people have made. You don't know what they have built, and you really don't even know the things that you benefit from every single day were built by particular people. You know, when we think about even the suffrage movement and how there were some who said we should not be including these particular people. And some of those people said, well, we're still going to be in the fight. Even if I don't benefit today, the fight is worth it. People need to know that. You know, me as a Black woman, I am gratified to be able to tell the whole story about the experience, because it says there were white people and Black people who did the fight together to get us to where we are. And there's some place that we can still go together that is better than this particular moment. But if I don't know the history, I don't even have hope that it can get better. I can't celebrate what we've already done. I may only stay in that state of hopelessness. And that's the worst place, I think, for any of us to be. And to be able to tell the story and put the value of what everybody has contributed is very, very critical. You know, we are looking at people literally not knowing. When you drive down a street and you stop at a traffic light, you don't know that it's an African-American man that invented the traffic light, but you say Black people didn't contribute anything. That's a travesty. But if you know you invented this and you invented this, and then you talk about how other people invented other things, then we realize that all of us have something to a value that we contributed, and we all benefit on a daily basis from those things. That's why we need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of these things, because all of us are contributing something significant, and we all benefit every single day.
I love that. Jen, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I could, but I think Deidra did great. So
No, I know, that's hard. That's a hard one to follow. She did, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so the second question, Jen, we'll start with you because I know the league is currently involved in a lawsuit. So this question is, how does the current state of voting impact marginalized communities?
yep. So I think this is incredibly important, and we talked about this a little bit, but at the end of the day, our democracy works best when we all participate. We want everyone to be heard, but there's more barriers to the ballot box for a lot of individuals. And that's why things like election protection are so important, why partnerships between organizations like the Delta and League and Honesty are important. So one of the things we have right now is litigation on ADA access. So after 458 passed, which now we have some of the strictest voter ID laws in the country, voting got harder for people with disabilities. It was already hard. And so we are now arguing that because it's hard enough that it actually violates the ADA. The league actually has been working on disability access since the 80s here in Ohio and had laws passed here in Ohio for disability access that became fodder for how those laws were designed at the national level. And what I can tell you is that about 10 or 11% of Ohioans don't have the required ID, which is why we want people to go to Vote Riders if they need it, so they can get that assistance. If you're a person with disability, you're far less likely to have that ID. And a lot of people with disabilities went to early vote because you could still use the last four of your social. That's no longer the case. You have to have that strict ID, whether you vote in person on election day in your neighborhood location or at the early vote center in your county. So then that means that the best option if you don't have an ID would be to vote by mail or what we call absentee. But that's not easy either. So first off, it's secure. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because you have to prove your identity twice, once to get the ballot sent to you and once for the ballot to count. But if you decide to use that method, then you're relying on the mail, and we know the mail is particularly slow. Every election, there is mail that doesn't get where it's supposed to go. I live in a neighborhood in Columbus where I'm lucky to see a mail delivery person twice a week, literally. And I'm right off of 71. We have challenges with the mail. So then a lot of people want to take it to the drop box. And the challenge with that is that there is a very limited number of individuals who can take a voted ballot to the drop box. And it includes some obvious folks like son, daughter, mother, father. It doesn't include some very obvious folks, grandkids, roommates, significant others, in-home caregivers. These are all individuals that could assist in some way. The law is even a little vague on what it means to assist. Does that mean if they get it out of the mailbox for someone, put it back in the mailbox for someone, if they take it to the drop box? And the problem is 458 has strengthened those penalties to now be a felony. So if a grandkid takes a grandparent's ballot to the drop box, there's a chance they wouldn't get caught, but there's also a very good chance that they could be charged with a felony. We wrote a letter to LaRose asking for clarification on this, and LaRose said that each of the 88 county prosecutors could decide if they would prosecute those cases or not. So that is why we have that lawsuit, and it is our hope that we can indeed get that opened up. I think there was another question. Yes, people can get free IDs. You can get a free state ID, not a free driver's license. You're going to get a free state ID through the Ohio BMV. Again, you need to have backing documents. If you don't have those, you should contact Vote Riders. But here's the other thing that I'm worried about with students is that if they are an out-of-state student and they go to get a free state ID, because they would have to pay for a driver's license, go get a free state ID, their out-of-state driver's license is now invalid. So they literally could be driving around illegally and not even know it. So please make sure you check in on your young ones in your life to make sure they have a voting plan, because there's all these complicated pieces to it.
Deidra, do you want to add anything to that?
I think just that people don't understand there are real life circumstances why people might not have an ID. The year before 458 was passed, I was doing election protection, and there was a woman standing outside of a polling location bawling. And of course, I walked up to her, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I can't vote because I got robbed last night and I don't have my license anymore. I don't have my wallet. I don't have anything." I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I'm trying to comfort her around that. But I said, "Well, do you have a utility bill or anything at home?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, if you have that, you can at least still vote today, you know, and then you could do this to get another driver's license." And she was so happy. She stopped crying. She said, "Oh, because I voted my whole life. Oh, thank God." So just to be able to comfort her in that moment because of that circumstance, that's real life for people. We have people, they lose their license. They might get robbed, whatever the case might be. They may have had a fire the day before and had to get out. And that's the one thing that didn't get saved. We don't think about the real life implications with this. Oh, well, everybody has a driver's license. Not so. And to be able to access underlying documents. We have a lot of people who are not born in the state of Ohio who now live and work here. So even getting those documents, it's not as simple as, well, I can go down, if I have a car, I can go down to, the county records office and get it. That's just not realistic for everybody's experience. There are other ways that we can prove that we're who we say we are. A photo ID from your college can do the same thing, right? You have to prove that to get that particular thing. So we should just be a little bit more realistic with those type of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I was saying before we came on that a lot of the rhetoric is, well, of course, everyone has an ID. Everyone has an ID. And it's not the case. And to hear that 10 to 11% of people don't is, that just works right against that argument. Okay, we have a question that was in the chat. Michael Barron said, "I was outraged when the elected State Board of Education had their authority reduced by the legislature without public consent. What can we do to fight back against this anti-democratic power grab? And to make it maybe a little more broad, what can people do when they disagree with their government? Where's the democracy? What's the next step? What can people do in those situations? State Board being one example of that, but in general, what can people do?" And whoever wants to take that first.
So I think there's so many important things. So first off, we need the public to be aware of these situations. And I think there could be a large part of the public that doesn't even actually understand what the State Board of Education does, let alone how it's elected or what has happened now. And so I think groups like Honesty are so important just to do that education, right? We did some work with the school board schools, I think is what it was called. Thinking about just educating the general public on what the role is and making sure, because that's step one. If we don't understand how the things work, it's hard to participate. That's why we made Know Your Ohio Government, and we may work with Honesty to really next textbook to really make sure we're strong on explaining the education pieces of our state government. So that's one. And then the second is, I think we need to help people know how to engage, right? You'd be surprised how many people just think, well, I took action, and their taking action was they made a statement on their social media outlet of choice. And that is something, right? But I think we want to demystify how folks can raise their voices, calling the governor about this, those kinds of things. So the work that you all do at Honesty is particularly important for that.
I would add to that absolutely what Jen said. And what we don't realize is that it doesn't take a whole lot for some things. Sometimes policymakers don't want to listen, but very often, if you had 10 people call the chairperson's office, call the governor's office about a single issue, they're going to go, oh, wait, people are talking about this thing. So sometimes it's you gathering 10 members of your family or 10 of your friends or 10 of your coworkers and saying, hey, everybody, let's all call. Let's all send a letter. Let's all send an email about this particular thing. You'd be surprised that you're going to get a response. And the other thing that I would always encourage people to do, don't wait until it's something that you're outraged about to try to build a connection. Offer yourself as an expert to people who are in policy-making roles, because they often don't know about things that you know something about because you're actually in that particular field. So if you become that expert, they're going to reach out to you. And sometimes it's just a little bit of stroking ego. Hey, you did this thing that was great and I appreciate it. So the next time you call, they're going to take your call because they're going to remember the people that gave them positive affirmation. And you want to put yourself in that position so that when there is something that you're critical about, you've already gotten in before they know you're bringing a criticism or you're asking them to do something different than what may already be going on.
This is a good point. Credit when it's due, and thanking people. One more question here. So Deidra, you were encouraging people to run for office, which I also agree with, encouraging people to run for office. However, looking at our state house, looking at our federal government, we have a very homogenous looking government. So what do you say to people who don't see themselves in their government to encourage them to run? And again, either one of you, Deidra.
Sure.
I think that's why it's important to take advantage of the type of programs that are there to help people get positioned to run. There is a quote unquote art and science to being a good candidate. It's not just that you have the right ideas. It's that you kind of have to understand how to position yourself, how to be able to, figure out who should you talk to, who is persuadable, how to come up with persuadable messages, etc. So, programs like what Delta offers, programs like there's an entity called LEAD offers. Ohio State University does a program where they train and prepare women to run for office. So you want to position yourself with those so that you at least have that type of training. And it's also some validation of you as a potential candidate. I would take advantage of those type of things because very often people just really, I see it all the time. It's like, oh gosh, you didn't know that particular thing was important. You were really good, but you didn't know that thing was important. And somebody that does, they use the advantage of their knowledge. So it's just like anything else. I would certainly take advantage of those type of things, but then don't give up on yourself. If you run and you don't win the first time, it doesn't mean that it's over for you. Maybe it wasn't your time at that moment, but your time can still come, and just make all the connections you possibly can so that you are better positioned the next time, and be open to different roles. Maybe you would really be great as a county commissioner, but you had in your mind that you were going to run for state rep. You just never know.
I would, I'm going to add to that a couple things. First off, you probably do lose your first election. Most people lose their first election before they win, but take advantage of the programs like the Deltas have, or Lead Ohio, or whatever. I think that's super important. But also keep in, and again, those lower races, even if you just start with neighborhood commission, that's often a great place to start. There's even a lot of nonpartisan local races that you can really start with. Those are great. Maybe central committee for a party. One thing, I'm sorry, I just got distracted by a text. One thing I was going to mention is we also, this is why we need to fight gerrymandering. When legislative seats are predetermined by party through gerrymandering, both parties are going to just pick their favorite candidates. So, and what you see then, quite frankly, is a lot of white men. So in states that are, there is been research that in states where there's gerrymandering, there are fewer women in office. There are fewer people of color in office. And so please also join. We're both working on Citizens Not Politicians. So join our movement to take mapping out of the hands of politicians and lobbyists as well.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Great way to kick off March. So many good points in this conversation. We have just a couple of things to close up with here, a couple of action steps. So as you heard, this is really important. The Ohio primary is March 19th. Early voting is open now. It's really important to honesty that we get people out to vote, because we need honest education, we need school funding, we need students' rights, we need safe communities, and all of these things are on the ballot in March. We've got local school funding issues. We've got a big Supreme Court race this year. We have state house seats that are up, and we have a U.S. congressional races. So again, very important to get out and vote. Next. And also our partners they have an action call out for protecting gender affirming care. This has been a months long issue making its way through the state of Ohio. So there is a link here for Trans Allies of Ohio to send testimony to these two departments and comment about supporting our transgender Ohioans. Again, these are upcoming dates for this. Well, the State House is on recess, so no upcoming dates there. State Board, March 11th, Department of Education and Workforce, March 14th. Next slide. And most importantly, if you can follow Honesty using this QR code or go to honestyforohioeducation.org. Our website is a tremendous database of resources. We are tracking legislation. We are tracking what's going on across the different entities in Ohio. And we have a wonderful mailing list, a newsletter that comes out once a week that keeps you updated on action steps and on what's happening. You can also follow us at Honesty for Ohio Ed on different platforms. And we look forward to connecting with you and keeping you informed and providing you with resources. Speaking of resources, on our next slide, again, this will be posted, but there's so many links here. Like I said, we have just a really rich database on our website. Lots of good information here. Lots of good resources for you to consider. So be sure to check those out. And with that, thank you so much for attending this Lunch and Learn. Thanks for the grace. This is my first one of these, so I appreciate our speakers. I appreciate all the support today, and looking forward to many more of these in the future. So thank you all so much.